suspects during police interviews. So, take it away, Annie.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Nikki, for having me. So yes, as Izzy has mentioned, I'm sort of in the middle of my research, which looks at the language of police interviews of suspects, age 17 and 18. And I've only just sort of started my analysis because those people who work with police interviews, they're quite hard to get hold of. So I've only just started, so I'm just going to give you some initial observations and some very, very preliminary findings of what I have so far. Now, to set the scene, anything exciting, I would say, that happens, or any legislative changes that happen in terms of, or age-related ones, in England and Wales, happen somewhere along this line. So to make the picture a bit more complete, for witnesses, we have no minimum age legally, but we do have a maximum age for child witnesses, which is 17. So per legal definition, a child witness can be anybody between the ages of 0 and 17. That's then when the law draws a line, and the day you turn 18, you're considered an adult witness. Now this is all, my whole research is all implying that we're talking about interviews who don't have any other kind of vulnerabilities, okay? Now for children, for suspects, we do need another line in the law, which is right here, which is what's called the age of criminal responsibility, which is 10 years old in England and Wales, and so this gives us then this group of child suspects is anybody between the ages of 10 and 17, okay, which is quite a big spectrum. And then, again, the day you turn 18, you're an adult suspect and you're sort of on your own. And I'm, very, very interested in, this kind of area, so that the overnight transition and the reason why I'm looking at suspects as well is just because I think they're a bit less well represented in research, and especially when it comes to young people, I'm sort of a firm believer in, the statement that, children don't stop being children just because they commit a crime, and I think it's worthy of investigating it further. So this has been mentioned before are the special measures. I'm going to list the ones for 17-year-olds on the left-hand side and the ones for 18-year-olds on the right. The most obvious one is the mandatory presence of an appropriate adult during questioning, and appropriate adults just make sure that, they sort of safeguard the child during formal questioning. Then we have this is in the description of the peace interviewing model, sort of guidance for interviewing officers, when they make reference to the risk of increased suggestibility in young interviewees, including suspects. So suggestibility just means that people come to accept messages that are being communicated to them, even if they don't correspond with the truth. So a young person might go along with whatever an interviewer puts to them, even if that's not actually what has happened. It's sort of the yes-saying syndrome. And then the last one is from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the CRC, which alongside lots of other sort of human rights just mentions that if you are being questioned by the police, that age-related needs need to be taken into account. The right-hand side is empty, and it very much stays empty because there is, you don't get any help. And for example, the intermediaries that we heard a lot about in the morning session, this is a scheme that is exclusively for witnesses, and there is no help for suspects around. So we can see it is a massive, just a very clear split between these two legislative backgrounds. However, this can just be one day apart, and there's nothing substantial that happens in your mental development, overnight, of course. Now let's see how many people this actually affects. I would like you to look at this number, 677,805. This is according to the latest census, was the amount of 17-year-olds we had in England and Wales from, I think it's July to July 2015 to 16. So, and all of these people, there's more than 500,000 people, they're now sort of in the process of turning 18. And on average, this means that we have 1,857 birthdays of people turning 18, which means that we had 1,857 people who were still, who could still benefit from the special measures yesterday, but they can no longer do so today. And then we have another 1,857 people to whom they still apply today, but won't tomorrow. So this is a change that affects a lot of people every single day. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that, we've got 670,000 people who will be interviewed by the police as suspects, but we still have, I think it's somewhere between 20-ish%, it was 23% in 2012, 12 of notifiable offences that have been committed by young people, and within that group, the vast majority are committed by sort of the older age spectrum, sort of 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds. So this brings me to my premises and to my big, broad research question. So I think we've established that 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds are subject to very, very different legislative backgrounds. And the second one is the fact that police interviews are preponderantly linguistic events. They're situations of communication by means of spoken language. So as a forensic linguist, this is, very, very exciting. So this is what I'm trying to investigate. I want to know how the different legislative backgrounds and the associated special measures affect the language that is used in the interviews with both of these age groups. And in order to do my research, I've decided to go with conversation analysis. This is an approach that has been applied very, very successfully by a lot of researchers previously. And it's very, very detailed, and you can really sort of get in there, and it's super, super fascinating to look at the little grainy details. For those of you who are not familiar with conversation analysis, it's rooted in sociology, developed in the 60s and 70s by Sachs, Shegloff and Jefferson, but it has since been applied very successfully in a very, very broad variety of other academic fields. So yeah, it's a fine-grained analysis of naturally occurring language. Now, when I started my project, and I sort of came across these definitions, and I had to sort of go, hang on a minute, how natural is a police interview? You have people who are potentially detained and questioned against their will. Not every interview is voluntary. And it's so institutionalized and it's so structured. So what is natural about it? But in the conversation analysis sort of sense, the only thing it means is that this is not data that was produced for research purposes. Okay, so this happened, and whether or not I end up analysing it for my PhD doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the way in which the interview was conducted. It's a very inductive approach. It's very, very data-driven, and because of this, it also then informs every step of your analysis. So we start off with data collection, which is already part of it. It informs that, and then the selection of the data, transcription, and the actual analysis. So I'm going to take you through these 4 steps now: the collection, selection, transcription, and analysis, with some general input, but also with reference to my own research. And the analysis bit is a little case study of one interview that I've done so far, or part of an interview that I've done so far. Data collection, it takes a while because police interview data are very, very well protected, which is a very reassuring thing. And I think especially in my case, because I'm requesting interviews of legal children, this is highly sensitive data. So yes, but it is a bit difficult. So when I request data, I try to impose as few restrictions as possible. So the only thing I wanted them to be suspect interviews, and I wanted them to be 17 or 18 years of age. And the other 2 restrictions I had were I wanted them to be from closed cases, just because I don't want to get involved in anything. And the other one was just that I wanted them to be as recent as possible. And I said, if possible, no older than 10 years, because I would just like my findings to sort of represent the most current possible practice. Another thing I had to do when I was on site, physically collecting the data, was audio anonymization. So I had to use a program that read the MP3 file, and then I had to just basically remove all identifying features. So names of anybody in the interview room, dates, locations, street names, etc. I used white noise to cancel out mine instead of bleeping out, because if you listen to something with bleeps, our brain is conditioned to think that they're swear words. So it makes it sound like it's very amusing, but it's not very helpful. It's a bit distracting. So I just used white noise for that. And then we don't transcribe everything. We say a minute of police interview data, or any interview data, or any audio data, takes at least an hour to transcribe with the sort of detail that we need. So that's where the sort of data selection then comes in. So you listen to it and you really let the data speak, and then you identify certain sections that you would like to look at more closely, and these are then the parts that I transcribe. So a very important thing about transcription is the fact that transcription is not an objective endeavour. In other words, the interpretation of a recording cannot be neutral, it always has a point of view. And this is not just me transcribing, doing a CA transcript of a police interview for a PhD project. I'm talking about any kind of transcription, also including just standard police transcription that happens all day, every day, around the country. There's a lot of decisions that are being made by the typists when they transcribe the data. And we have two sort of processes that happen. The first one is the interpretive process, by which we look at what do we actually transcribe. So that's what I just explained before about the data selection, sort of what bits do we want to have in there. And the other one is the representational process, where we look at how something is transcribed. What sort of stuck out to me in the data that I have were regional accents, and how do you transcribe that? Because there's a lot of phonetic features that can carry quite a lot of meaning. And one of the examples I have here, this is just a very short excerpt from my own data. And on line 30 here, we have this thing that looks a bit like a question mark, which is a symbol from the International Phonetic Alphabet, which denotes a glottal stop. A glottal stop is basically the letter T, but it's not pronounced in the front of your mouth, but it's pronounced or produced in your glottis. So instead of saying, it is all being recorded, this interviewer in this case said, it is all being recorded. And these subtle differences have got, they can influence the way that somebody's perceived, and potentially you might observe that police officer adapt their accent or adapt features like this depending on who they're talking to. They might be fronting their T's when they talk to a lawyer, for example, but then maybe not if they have, say, like a very, very working class suspect that they're trying to build rapport with, for example. The conventions that I use are based on Jefferson's work. She's one of the three founders of conversation analysis. And her conventions allow you to include lots and lots and lots of features. I've just picked out the ones that we can see here. So we have pause lengths. This is the numbers in the little brackets are sort of the amounts of seconds. So these are 3/10 of a second's worth of a pause. We have stuff such as intonation. So this little arrow here means that it's a raised intonation. So we have being recorded in this machine. And then we also have stuff such as overlaps, which we can see here. So whilst the interviewer is saying it is all, we hear a little yawn from the suspect. Okay, and this happens at the same time. And the reason why we use, in conversation analysis, the reason why we use typewriter font is not just because it's very hip and fancy, but it's actually very handy because it's got a fixed character width. So especially when we look at stuff such as overlaps, you can be very precise and they can be perfectly aligned. So this is very, very helpful. Okay, so when I was going through my interview data, one of the first things that stuck out to me was the police caution and how that was given. We all know that the police caution must be given to every detainee or any interviewee at the beginning of every interview. And this is the wording: you're not obliged to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later align in court, and anything you do say may be given in evidence. Now, from listening to my data set and all of my interviews, I found that whenever the caution was being given, it corresponded with one of 5 sort of systems of explaining it, and I'll illustrate it in a second. So yeah, it's always going to be one of 5 ways in which it was handled, and this is what I found. So it's always, the interviewer reads out down the caution and then says, "Do you understand?" The suspect says yes, and then the interviewer just moves on to the interview. I'm very happy to say that I've only observed this in interviews with 18-year-olds and not with 17-year-olds because, seeing as we're supposed to be protecting the children, and if we just have this, a suspect who says, "Yes, I understand what the caution means," we have no way of fully, knowing that this suspect actually fully understands what's going on. The second one is when the caution is being read and then without any verification question, it's automatically being broken down and paraphrased. I heard from talking to police that this is sort of good practice, especially when you talk to young people or otherwise vulnerable people that you just, you have to read it out, but because it's very complex, I'm just going to break it down anyway. The third one is caution is being read. Do you understand? Suspect says yes. but then the interviewer just breaks it down anyway. Again, I think that's good practice with some interviewees. The last one, the fourth one, is the caution is being read, interviewer asks, do you understand? Suspect says yes, and then the interviewer goes, that's great, explain it to me. And in all the examples that I've heard, the suspect fails, and he tries and then the interviewer goes, okay, fine, I'll explain it to you, I'll paraphrase it. And then I also have one which is a bit of a special one where the interviewer asks, do you understand the caution? But then the conversation is somehow interrupted by the appropriate adult who sort of goes, oh yes, come on, you do understand, and they sort of move on. So that's sort of interesting for many other reasons, but I'm going to be focusing on an interview that I have where this happens, so where the explanation is requested, and then the suspect fails, and then sort of how that is communicated. So the one interview that we're going to be looking at today is an interview with a 17-year-old suspect who's suspected of having committed a robbery. The interview takes 17 minutes and 19 seconds. The suspect is male, the interviewer is female, and we have other people present in the room, but they do not take part in this section, in the caution section. So we have a second interviewer, an appropriate adult, as well as a solicitor, and in total it's 1 minute and 23 seconds that are spent on the caution. These are things that I do know about the interview, but I completely appreciate the fact that there are things that I don't know, just because I don't have access to a lot of information. And one big thing is the question whether somebody is a first-time offender or a repeat offender, and sort of how that might affect how a caution is being explained to somebody. So yeah, that's just like a variable that I can't control, and I appreciate that. So research has shown that even a lot of adults with low vulnerabilities struggle to understand the cautions, the meaning of the caution, especially the implications of the caution. And the reason why that is also because instructions for what you do if somebody doesn't understand it are very, very vague. And this is all we get. If it appears a person doesn't understand the caution, the person giving it should explain it in their own words. And this is sort of all you get. So obviously that leaves quite a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. So if I have now a police interview with a 17-year-old where I see that this has obviously happened, these are the kind of questions I want to look at. What kind of conversational structure can we observe in this caution part of the interview? What can turn lengths and timings tell us? And are the special measures considered? Okay, so I'm now going to show you a couple of excerpts from the interview. Ignore all the little symbols for now, just have a little read through them. The excerpts are all in chronological order, but it's not the entire interview, so I've cut off some bits and bobs. So yeah, this is the first one. Have a read through that. Okay, so there's a couple of things I would like to point out. The first ones are these bigger than and smaller than signs, which mean that everything that's in between them is said more rapidly than the surrounding text. And obviously every part of the caution is very important, but then you especially have something like something which you later align in court, which really shouldn't be rushed and should be pronounced and sort of enunciated very, very clearly. The second thing we have is this, so these equal signs from line 8 and 9 mean that no time elapses between those two words. So this is what we call latching. So basically this means, do you know what that caution means yet? And that's, clearly not a genuine, answer to the question, do you actually understand? This, I think, is an example of what I mentioned before about suggestibility, that you just sort of go along with it. Obviously, you know that the question's going to be, do you understand what it means? And you just sort of go, yeah, trying to get out of it. And then the next one we have, can you explain it to me? And then we have a pause of 0.7 seconds, which is actually quite a long pause, because normally a pause is about 0.2 seconds in between turns. So you can tell now the suspect is thinking, he actually has to come up with something. And then he starts to explain it, that I'm under arrest for, and then we have like the mega pause. This is 1.7 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a long break in an utterance. And I think that already sort of tells the interviewer sort of what's going on. I don't think he's going to do it. And then in the end here, we've got the rising intonation, so this makes it sound like a question. Then I'm under arrest for break, a robbery or something. But I think that the long pause has already prepared the interviewer for it. That's why I can then also, without a break, just latch on okay, fine. I'll go on to explain it now. So this is the next one. Okay, and the only thing I want to show you here is that we have the overlap. So the suspect is trying to say yeah, but he can't even finish the turn without the interviewer already sort of overrunning him. Sort of going. So anyway, so we break it down into smaller chunks. There it is. This is the next one. Okay, and this is, I'm showing you this because of these two things. Well, it's the latching on either side of the suspect's turn. So we have the same question again. Do you understand what that means? Suspect again goes, yeah, but then the police officer, not really taking that question into consideration. This is not really assurance that he understands what's going on, and then just goes, yeah, anyway, and then the final part of the caution is the following. This entire thing between what that means, yeah, happens within less than half a second. Okay, so there's no way that this is actually assuring anything. And this is the last bit. And what we can see here is again an overlap of the suspect trying to go, there it is, but he's already again like overrun by the interviewer, so he's not really allowed to say a whole lot. In numbers, this is what we have. We have in this section we have 8 turns by the interviewer. She utters a total of 262 words, which is an average of 33 words per turn. The suspect, on the other hand, 7 turns with a total number of 15, so that's just about 2 per turn. Now, of course, you can say, yes, because, interviewer is explaining the caution. Of course he's going to have more words than the suspect. Yes, absolutely. However, based on all these overlaps and the sort of latch between turn timings of things, you can sort of tell that these, even the limited turns that he has, or the limited words that he has, are not really being respected very well. So it seems like just because you've broken down the caution doesn't actually mean the suspect now understands. So it's more about sort of ticking boxes than it is to actually make sure that somebody knows what's going on. Very briefly, so this was just like the first little thing